A grandmother serves her church faithfully for almost 50 years. She works in the nursery, cooks hundreds of meals, teaches Bible study, goes on retreats, and tithes every single paycheck. Then she breaks her back in a car accident and becomes homebound. For the next 10 years, not a single person from her church visits her. Not one phone call, not one card, nothing. Until she's literally on her deathbed. That's when the pastor finally shows up, not to comfort her, but to tell her to remember your church in your will. She waited until exactly the right moment, in front of exactly the right audience, to expose these greedy preachers for what they really were. Twice. Let's get into it. This story comes from a man talking about his grandmother. She was a lifelong member of a large, conservative evangelical church in the Deep South. He calls it Big White Church. Grandma wasn't just a member, she was the backbone of that church. She worked in the nursery every Sunday morning. She helped cook hundreds of church fellowship breakfasts and dinners. She went on dozens of retreats and choir tours. She taught youth Bible study on Sunday nights. She supported missions. She always tithed and often gave extra. But more than any of that, her greatest talent was making other people feel important. Her grandson shares a memory. He watched her single-handedly cook breakfast for dozens of youth group kids, a task that took over 2 hours. And when the meal was done, she asked the group to give a round of applause to the high school student leader for doing such a great job organizing the prayer breakfast. She never took credit. She just served. Another time, on a church retreat, one of the assistant pastors forgot a big box of evangelistic materials. He asked Grandma to drive back to the city in the middle of the night to retrieve them. She did it without complaint. Drove most of the night, got the materials, came back in time for the morning program. The assistant pastor never even thanked her. When her grandson asked her about it, she said she didn't mind. Her reward would be that those materials would help children find Jesus. That's the kind of woman she was. Then, at age 73, everything changed. She broke her back in a car accident. For the last 10 years of her life, she was homebound. Her mind was sharp as ever, but her body wore out a little more each day. During those 10 years, she made many attempts to reach out to her church. She invited the pastors to visit. She reached out to friends she had served alongside for decades. Every single invitation was declined or ignored. Not one person from Big White Church called her, visited her, or sent her a note for 10 years. Near the end, when she was in home hospice care, she decided to plan her own funeral. She and her husband called the church and asked for the senior pastor, a man she had known for over 30 years, to come help them plan the memorial service. The senior pastor was too busy, but the assistant pastor stopped by a few days later. And here's what happened at that meeting, with Grandma literally on her deathbed. They discussed her funeral for a couple of minutes. Then the assistant pastor changed the subject. He started pressuring her to lay up your treasure in heaven by remembering your church in your will. Her husband told him firmly that this was neither the time nor the place to discuss her will. They went back to the funeral for a few minutes. Then the assistant pastor steered the conversation back to the church's financial needs. Where your treasure is, your heart will be also. Her husband told him again, it was inappropriate to talk about money when she was terminally ill and in enormous physical pain. The assistant pastor would agree, talk about the funeral for a minute, then go right back to the will. And then something happened that no one in the family had ever seen before. Grandma started crying. To put this in context, this woman was titanium coated with diamond, wrapped in Kevlar. She never cried for herself. Not when the doctor told her she would never walk again. Not during 6 months of failed rehab. She would shed tears at funerals. She would cry to comfort others. But she never, ever cried for herself. Now she was sobbing uncontrollably. Her husband, a retired steelworker, former Marine sergeant, and Korean War combat veteran, physically grabbed the assistant pastor and escorted him out of their house. Not too gently. Against all expectations, Grandma lived another 6 months, but eventually she passed away. The family held her memorial service at the funeral home, not at Big White Church. The senior pastor and assistant pastor were conspicuously absent. In fact, no one from the church showed up at all. At the start of the service, Grandpa stood up and said, "Some of you may have heard that I disinvited the pastors from this service. This is not the place for me to give my reasons, although you all know me and know my reasons are good ones. Also, my wife asked me to exclude them." Then he announced they were doing an open microphone funeral. Anyone who wanted to say something could come up and share a story about Grandma. About 100 people were there. At least a third of them stepped up to speak. The service was supposed to last 30 minutes. It lasted over 2 hours. There was laughing, crying, hugging. Grandchildren played her favorite songs on piano and guitar. Everyone joined hands and sang her favorite hymns. Afterwards, people told Grandpa it was one of the most comforting funerals they'd ever attended. More than a few remarked, "Funerals are better without preachers anyway." But Grandma wasn't done. A couple of weeks later, it was time for the reading of the will. Now, the grandson explains that reading of the will events aren't really necessary anymore. Modern technology has made them practically extinct. But in their family, it was a tradition, an excuse for the extended family to get together. And the family rumor mill had been buzzing. Grandpa had been hinting that Grandma's will contained some surprises. The reading was held in a conference room at a lawyer's office. The room was packed. Children, grandchildren, aunts, uncles, great-aunts, great-uncles. And then, to everyone's surprise, in walked the senior pastor and assistant pastor from Big White Church. They announced that Grandma's lawyer had told them her will contained bequests not only for the church, but for them personally. The family couldn't help noticing that these preachers appeared to be actively salivating at their good fortune. The lawyer suggested they sit in chairs at the front of the room next to him. What the pastors didn't notice was that this position made it easy for everyone else to watch them closely, and practically impossible for them to leave the packed room before the reading was over. The bequests began. They were arranged in order of increasing value. Sentimental items first, then small amounts to grandchildren, then larger amounts to children, then generous donations to local charities. The pastors listened politely, but with steadily growing anticipation as they noticed the upward trend in Grandma's generosity. Finally, the lawyer got to the church's section of the will. He said, "This is a bit unusual, but before I announce these bequests, the deceased requested that I read the following statement." He opened a letter written in Grandma's own handwriting. "For the past 10 years, not one person from Big White Church has ever called me, come to visit me, or sent me a note to tell me that they cared about me. Not one minister, not one deacon, not one of the church women, not one of the church members who I worked with for all of those years, loved dearly, and thought were my friends. I worked very hard for you when you needed me, for many, many years. But when I needed you and your church, you all pretended that I didn't exist. I only got one visit, when I was dying, and I invited the senior pastor to come to my house and help me plan my funeral. This was my last attempt, after many attempts over the past 10 years, to reach out to my church and pastor, whom I still loved dearly, even though they had made it clear they did not love me. But the senior pastor couldn't find the time to visit me, or even call me. The assistant pastor came by my house, but he didn't want to talk about my funeral. He just wanted me to remember his church in my will. That's all. Just remember his church in my will. It was then that I realized I had allowed my church to break my heart for one last time, but that was the last time, the very last time. The assistant pastor did not know it when he visited me, but my husband and I had already prepared my will long before his visit, which included a double tithe, 20% of my entire estate, for what was now my former church. She named the amount. The family gasped. It was an enormous sum of money. But I got to feeling badly that we had not personally remembered such nice people as the senior pastor and assistant pastor, so I changed my will to include them by name. While I was at it, I changed the amount of money I left to Big White Church to match all of the love they showed me during the last 10 years of my life when I was suffering and lonely and no longer able to work my behind off for them, for free, like I had done for almost half a century. The lawyer finished reading her statement. Then he said, "Now let's get back to the bequests. Bequest to the assistant pastor, 1 cent. Bequest to the senior pastor, 1 cent. Bequest to Big White Church, 1 cent. The pastors sat there looking like someone had injected a gallon of Novocaine into their jaws. Every family member felt an overwhelming urge to laugh out loud, but they kept quiet. They knew Grandma. They knew she wasn't finished yet. She was setting them up for a 1-2 punch. The lawyer continued, "There is one last bequest for a charity called..." And he named a black charity that ran a food bank, programs for foster children, meal delivery for seniors, legal aid, and other social services. Most of the family had no idea what this charity was, but by the looks on their faces, the pastors knew it very well. Years ago, Big White Church had briefly supported this charity. Then there was a bitter, acrimonious breakup, allegedly because the charity was practicing the social gospel instead of the true gospel. But everyone in the Deep South knew the real reason. The charity was run by a black church, and Big White Church was 100% white. When the church cut ties with this charity, Grandma and Grandpa had considered leaving, but they decided to stay and try to teach tolerance by their words and example. Grandma used to say, "My church is my mission field." What no one knew until after she died was that she and Grandpa had secretly been sending a portion of their tithe to that black charity every single month, for years. To the pastors, this was one of the most personally insulting things she could have done. It simultaneously labeled them as racists, condemned their bigotry, and crushed their delusions of superiority. It said, "These black human beings, whom you hate and have mistreated, are better people than you are. So they deserve my money more than you do." The lawyer paused. Every eye in the room was fixed on the pastors. Then he said, "The amount is..." And he named the exact same enormous sum of money that Grandma had originally planned to give to Big White Church. Every penny that would have been theirs went to the charity they hated most. Now let's talk about the comments, because Reddit was in awe. This post has over 42,000 upvotes. The top comment said, "My hat is off to your grandmother as a human and as a badass. I aspire to both be as generous and as devastating as her." Another comment said, "I love that your grandma actually gave them 1 cent. That way they can't contest the will. Smart woman." And that's true. By specifically naming them and leaving them something, they couldn't claim they were accidentally forgotten. One person wrote, "Kill them with kindness. This is how it's done. Grandma just gave her PhD defense and schooled the committee." Someone asked if the pastors ever tried to fight it legally. The grandson replied, his uncle, who was Grandma's lawyer, got a call from the church's attorney threatening to dispute the will. His uncle's response was, "If you do that, everything that happened in that meeting will become a matter of public record. Are you sure you want that in the local newspapers and on TV?" They never heard from them again. Another commenter said, "It's churches like these that honestly ruin people's faith in Christianity." The grandson agreed. "There is very little Jesus left in Christianity anymore, if there ever was. It's all about money." But despite everything, he said being Grandma's grandson was one of the best things that ever happened to him. Because of her, his grandfather, and the rest of his family, he is truly rich in all the things that really matter. And none of those things are money. So what's the lesson here? Some people serve their entire lives without asking for anything in return. And when they finally need help, the people they served pretend they don't exist. But karma has a way of catching up. And sometimes the sweetest revenge comes after you're gone. So what do you think? Did Grandma go too far, or was this exactly what they deserved? And have you ever seen a church treat someone this badly? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, hit that subscribe button. We post new stories every single day. And if you want more satisfying revenge, check out the video on screen right now. I'll see you in the next one.